Hello, I am Patience, the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Solutions 8. And today I want to talk about how to find the right PPC agency for your business, specifically a Google Ads agency. To help me explore this topic, I'm joined by the brightest in the Google Ads business, a group of folks who also happen to be my awesome coworkers. I guess I'll introduce you guys real quick. I'll start with our fearless leader, founder and CEO of Solutions 8, Qasim.
Hi, Patience.
Hello. Our co-owner and Google Ads mad scientist, John Moran.
Hello.
Hello. And of course, our stellar client manager and super genius, Regina.
Hi.
Hello, hello. Awesome. So thank you, first of all, for joining me to explore this topic. Before we dive in, I sort of wanted to ask a couple of foundational questions. John, I was going to ask you this. I imagine the Google Ads isn't for every business owner. So before we discuss how to find the right Google Ads agency, I just sort of wanted to know, how do you know that Google Ads is right for you or your business to begin with?
Yep, and that's it's a good question because that's where half our leads we end up turning down. Half the leads that come to us we end up actually turning away because there's a few things that are just absolutely required for this to not only be successful but to actually be able to scale it or see the value. A great business owner who knows their numbers is first and foremost. If you don't know your metrics, like what can you afford to pay per lead, or how much do you have to make on a sale, or not getting into too much jargon like return on ad spend. Like if I give Google Ads $1, how much do I need out before I'm profitable versus not profitable? Because as you scale, the funny thing that we say is if you lose money and you're not sure, and as you scale, you lose money faster. So knowing your numbers is just absolute number one. And you really shouldn't hire any agency or even probably run paid traffic until you know those numbers, just because everything revolves around just pure metrics. And the other part is you need to answer your phone. It's super surprising how many times we send how much time we send traffic to a website. And since we listen to every single phone call that comes in from our campaigns, you'll hear a minute and a half, like a whole time, and then the person ends up hanging up. And we saw what they Googled, and we saw the page they're on. We're like, gosh, this is just a perfect lead. And then client gets upset and says, hey, I'm not having good lead flow. It's like, well, you didn't answer last 5 phone calls that happened last 2 days. Like, what are we doing? So you have to want it. I guess I would say you have to want to put the time, put the investment in, obviously an ad spend, but also investment into the business as just knowing your numbers and say, I want this to work, and figuring it out is 90% of the battle. It's just a gigantic puzzle of paid traffic, and finding what works with what metrics at what scale is going to be really beneficial. So you have to know your numbers, and you really have to want this, and you have to just be active. It's not just a magic wand that gets waved and boom, you have $1 million. Like it takes time to learn and grow.
Sure. Anything to add on that note, Qasim or Regina?
I know we haven't that you're probably about to get to this part, but when you're looking for a Google Ads agency, once you get to that point, make sure they're going to whip you into shape as far as the things that John just told you, because if they let you hire them, those things that he just listed are just core. Yeah.
Requisites. Yeah, for sure. Qasim, anything to add?
Yeah, I think in it's axiomatic, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have to have a compelling offer. You have to have something that people actually want to buy. Every now and again, you'll get a lead that comes through, and I'm about to maybe be a little rude here, but they'll come through and be like, oh, I'm a consultant. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, well, what do you consult on? What is your offer? Like, oh, anything, I can do business, I can do operations, I can do HR. And it's like, well, it's not like, that's not an offer as much as it is just like you're like a handyman, it's like, I can do all the things. So having a compelling offer that, to be frank, has been vetted, because now you can use Google Ads to test an offer. You can absolutely do that. It's expensive. So if you're venture backed, or if you have the funding and you're like, I want to see whether or not this is going to be viable, then Google Ads is a really fast way to do that. but know that it's a test. Walk into it with the understanding that, okay, you're not testing Google. That's my favorite thing that people say, by the way. Oh, we're going to test Google. And I'm like, Google works. Trust me. We're testing you. Like, how well does your offer perform in front of your audience in your competitive ecosystem? And so having that compelling offer, I think that's paramount. And far too often people like to blame, they're blaming the ad copy, or they're blaming the audience, they're blaming the geography, or they're blaming the agency. And it just barrels down to, hey, we took the people that you say this is for, and we put them in front of them, and they don't want it. And that's about as binary as we can get as far as, and I'm not trying to be petulant or rude. That's actually learning, I'm like, there's an opportunity there to improve upon whatever it is that we've developed from a narrative standpoint. And we help our clients with that. But starting off with a compelling offer that works, I think can be the difference between success and failure.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So this hypothetical business that I own, right? I have a great offer. I pick up the phone. I'm willing to put the work in. I have the budget, right? I imagine. So I have all these qualifications that make me a viable business for Google Ads. Why would I hire an agency instead of like maybe an in-house manager? Or why can't I just run it myself? Like, if I'm a smart enough person, and wouldn't that be cheaper? Why go for hiring an agency to begin with?
I think you can do it yourself. I think a lot of people do really successfully. It depends on the complexity, and honestly, like how valuable your time is. There's sort of that kind of apex that you're going to find, like, it gets more and more complex. The bigger your campaign gets, the more you spend, and then you become less and less efficient. And so at a certain point, I think that finding help, and it doesn't necessarily mean an agency, I think finding help becomes a necessary prerequisite as this becomes a more like the cornerstone of your marketing, which is where it is for a lot of people. And an agency isn't always the first line of defense. Like a really good freelancer might be a better option, especially if you're small. Agencies are expensive. So if you can find somebody on Upwork, do it. Like, I'm not going to talk you out of that. Like that's an amazing approach for smaller organizations. Now, when you hire Solutions 8, you have 5 resources dedicated to your account. You have a client manager, a specialist, a backup specialist, a call rater, and a strategist. So like, there's a lot that goes into what it is that we do. And one freelancer off of Upwork isn't going to be able to replace all of that, but they'll be able to get you pretty damn far, especially if you have a low spend. So I think that whole like, oh, you definitely need help, you can't do this yourself, that's a lie. It's the reason we've got our YouTube channel. It's the reason we have our courses. You can absolutely do this alone. But when you reach a point that, it's like a point of delineating returns, then I think an agency starts to make more sense. And we'll just be more efficient with everything. We're going to improve the efficiency of your time, improve the efficiency of your spend. How did I do there, y'all? Anything to add to that?
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think, oh, good.
Go ahead. I'll add to it later.
I know, I think we'll just kind of roundtable. I think we've been doing this for many years, and we manage, like I think $1.5 million a month in Google Ads across like 140 different industries. There's a lot of experience that I think that that we have with both lead generation or e-commerce versus what a freelancer might be doing. May not have that, they might have a really good experience, and they might be able to get you 90-95% of the way there. And that goes back to what Cosmo was saying, is you don't necessarily need an agency. Some things that you do pay for with an agency is autonomy, which I think is really important, because if your freelancer is not driving the strategy, then now you have an employee or someone, even if you have an employee yourself, that they're like, okay, boss, what do I do now? It's like, I don't know, you're supposed to be the expert. And then, there's really not a chief strategist. In an agency, we are given a very strict set of goals to hit, and you pay us to hit that goals, or you don't pay. So that's kind of the, I guess, unique selling proposition agency has.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, what we often see is clients come to us and they've been hitting the low-hanging fruit, the people at the bottom of the funnel, the people with the intent to buy. And I'm talking about in their campaigns, like they're going after the prospective clients or prospective customers that are, showing intent to buy, and they're the bottom of the funnel. So then when they're ready to grow, that's when it becomes really hard. You almost have to fight against the algorithm and fight against the market full of people bidding, competitors bidding. Some of them can operate under smaller margins than you. And so it becomes a game of, okay, how do we find our little niche higher up on the funnel so that we can double how many prospective clients we're targeting? That's when an agency might come into focus, because it, going after the people that have intent to buy is kind of obvious, but then moving up that funnel, it becomes a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah. Anytime anybody wants to grow or scale, I think that's a really good point, Regina. And I also think if you're in a hyper competitive environment, and there's some industries out there that have just teeth. I look at the cost per click for personal injury attorneys in California. It's $500. It's $500 a click. So then my question is like, well, how good could you be if this is something that like, shouldn't you come in and hire the experts this is all that we do? Because even if you could save a little bit of time on our fee, if I can improve the efficacy of your spend by 10 to 20%, not only did I just replace my fee, but I also amplified the value of your campaign on an exponential scale. So it feels penny wise and pound foolish in some instances. And maybe that's as much as I'll say on that, because it feels like I'm about to turn this into a sales pitch.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's a great point. And I appreciate that, we're willing to say you can do it yourself if you want to. It's work. But the education's out there. Our YouTube channel is out there. And we have these they're great resources. But yeah, how much time do you have? And are you looking to scale? That's a really good point, Regina. So we'll say that this hypothetical agency that I own is viable. I'm ready to scale. I'm too busy to do it myself. I really want an agency. There are a lot of PPC agencies out there. So let's get into the meat of what we wanted to talk about today. How do we find the right Google Ads agency? We managed to narrow it down to 8 essential qualities they should be looking for. 8. And we'll dig into them one at a time, but we'll just I'll give you a quick run through the list. We're going to be talking about qualifications, experience, tracking and reporting, communication, pricing, and transparency. That's 1. Strategy, tools, what kind of tools you're using, campaign building and account activity, and brand culture. So with that, let's quickly jump into qualifications. This is something that, as far as I know, you can kind of do this initial research yourself for bullet point 1 and 2 for experience and qualifications and experience. So when you're doing that research online, what qualifications should we be looking for on their website? What should they be boasting about that makes them qualified?
They should be boasting about being the best.
No,
Yeah, well, there's a lot of jack of all trades, master of none. And that's where we do get quite a bit of clients that was like, well, I had this other agency or I hired this other group before, and they were supposed to do my landing pages, my email, my SEO, my PPC, my Facebook, and, and then they kind of messed up a couple things, and some things went really well.
All of it a little bit.
yeah, everything kind of just went down a little bit. And that's the thing, is like the qualifications are, if you're going to go get brain surgery, you don't go and get a general practitioner, you hire a brain surgeon. Like, that's kind of the, if you really want this to work, you hire who is doing nothing but that. And I think that would be a really good qualification. Now, there's tons of, non-partners, partners, premier partners, and Google does a decent job at identifying who is, should be a partner, who should be a premier partner. I don't think that's everything, though, because you could be a premier partner in a very small niche. If I just do nothing but one type of cookie cutter campaign in one industry, I could become a premier partner, but I can't help the next industry.
Well, and the way that Google ranks premier partners too, they take into consideration how compliant you are with their recommendations. So yeah. I want to say, like, part of me is like, hey, if you're a premier partner, you just became suspect in my mind, because that just means that you're sitting there bowing at the feet of Google and doing everything that they say.
Well, Google's just like, you made us a lot of money. Good job. What happened to your clients? Who knows? Right. And so that's the part too, is like, and then Google actually came out recently and said, okay, fine, you can dismiss our recommendations and still become a premier partner, which is just like, now that kind of gets less important to me. It's like, okay, well, what have you actually done as an agency? So case studies. I know I'm kind of jumping into like the experience part, but case studies are, and some of that you could say like, hey, pop open your MCC account, show me some show me 20 clients that are just crushing it. And what industries are they in? They need to be able to portray their work, because everyone can put a PowerPoint together that says we're the best, no one else is, and we're really expensive, so hire us. So I mean, but everyone can do that. And so that's the thing that I think is the qualifications. You need to be able to show high level of competency at a very high level of spend for a lot of different industries, unless you're hiring a very niche agency. Then they just need to be really good at that one thing. But that's what I would say, is make sure that the company is at least either qualified in your niche or has enough experience to apply very good strategies to your specific business.
Yeah, great. Anything to add, Qasim or Gina?
This gets a little bullish, but I do feel like choosing a niche down agency is important. Trying to go for the jack of all trades agency is just going to get you in trouble, especially if you have a significant spend. And as often as not, those agencies, by the way, are outsourcing to us. Go check out our website. We've got a white label program, and now you just have somebody who's layering on some additional layers of margin. So sorry that I just bashed all of our white label partners. That's not what my intention at all. But really what I'm getting at is, I know it's easier to just write one check and have one point of contact. Like, I totally get that. But go try yourself for however long you want to run this experiment to do any two of those things. Learn email marketing and PPC, or SEO and marketing automation. And like, holy crap, it's a triple PhD in every level of analysis. And you have these agencies who are like, oh, we do all of this. How big is your team? 11. Like, we have 11 people. We do all of this. And, it's like, there's just no way. So I think finding the specialist is important. And with that said, watch me be a hypocrite, okay? Because I'm going to turn this around on all of us. I think that your specialist agency still needs to know full funnel digital marketing. They need to know content marketing, SEO, email marketing, branding, like, they need to understand how their thing interacts with all of the other things. Ryan Dice at Digital Marketer calls it a T-shaped marketer. And the top of the T is breadth. So I know all of these topics enough to be dangerous. And then the base of the T is the depth. And I've chosen this thing to really dive deep on. And so the base of our T is Google Ads. But you'll notice that a significant portion of our team have all gone through digital marketer training and certification. And they've been trained on stuff that isn't PPC related, but it's important because they end up like dancing together really well. Google Ads and SEO, I mean, they're kissing cousins. They play together so well. So, make sure that you have the niche agency that also understands the bigger picture.
Yeah, like for example, a DSA campaign is a dynamic search ad. It uses the Google Search Console, which is typically reserved for SEO purposes. It takes that engine, leverages that engine in order to scan a specific page on Google Ads in order to make sure that the content on the page that would rank for SEO is going to rank for a DSA campaign, so it's very relevant search terms results. And so from there, if it's not, then you have to just find out, well, what on the page? Is it your headers, your description, your H1s or H6 tags, all of those things. So it's a little bit of like, there's an SEO tool to enhance PPC, but on your almost like web development needs to be in line. So it's like, that's what T-shaped marketing
content is. Because DSA requires heavy, robust content. So now we're talking about content marketing and communications and
you can send leads to your site, paid leads to your site all day long, but if they're not converting and it's because you don't have a solid follow-up funnel, it would be ideal if your PPC specialist could tell you, hey, you don't have a solid follow-up funnel. Right. Go and build one, even if they're not the ones to implement it, because that's not what they do for a living, and you have to go find a specialist to do that. It would be good if they can.
Well, it's preferable that they're not in the
right direction.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Regina. I'm sorry.
That was it.
Oh, well, so I was going to say, I think it's preferable that they're not the ones to implement it, because otherwise they're just trying to sell you something. It's like, oh, you need a follow-up funnel, and we just happen to have a perfect solution. Like what you're dealing with folks that specialize on one service, you're paying us for the one thing. Everything else I tell you need, I'm solution agnostic. It's like, hey, you need a CRM and follow-up, and I have nothing to sell you. God bless you. Good luck on figuring that out. And of course, we have strong relationships. We can make those recommendations and introductions, but it puts us in a position to be able to operate with what I would consider to be an extreme degree of transparency, because we have nothing to gain other than the improvement of our campaigns.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like the only thing that we have to gain is our campaigns are going to look better, but they're your campaigns. So who cares?
You're going to keep us around for a little bit longer.
Right.
Awesome. So this is sort of along the same vein, but you know, when you're looking at an agency's experience, are there any red flags to look for? Are there any like must-haves experience-wise? You know, John, you'd recently just talked about looking for case studies. Does your prospective agency need to have experience with your industry? How would you go about looking for, you know, the right experience from your agency?
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting is you can have a topical, I guess, industry, lead generation, e-commerce, just because, and you have two different Shopify stores. One could be selling glasses and one could be selling hats. I mean, there's like a 90% overlap with strategy there. So, you know, we need to run branded dynamic marketing, smart shopping, DSA, and inbound pure broad search and start there. Like there's going to be some pretty standard best practices you can implement because you're trying to sell something online and you know how to leverage the Google Ads ecosystem in order to get there. So if you have an agency that's like, yeah, I specialize in selling hats, and also that agency also being the best, those two might be far apart. You might have an agency that just works on selling hats, but they may be like, mediocre. When a really good agency that knows e-commerce really well can apply very good strategies to any industry where an e-commerce transaction takes place. So there's a bit of, I think that of experience that comes from kind of like the sales process though. That's where you're really going to find out if there's any red flags. If someone says, hey, I sell this for a living, or I have this service for a living, do you think this will work on, excuse me, on Google Ads? And if the response is, yeah, absolutely, that's a red flag. You having an agency do the work first, like let me do a traffic study. Let me put together a list of keywords. Let me see what type of competition there is. Let's see what your budget is compared to what others are spending. You know, let's see if there is, you know, enough data here in order to say, yes, we believe this would work, but maybe not at this spend. It might be a little bit higher, or actually that's too much. We can actually start lower. Having the agency put in some groundwork initially and do the research and put together an action plan before you sign the contract or pay them $1, that is what you should be receiving from any agency. If they're like, yeah, absolutely, you're going to be a millionaire by like, you got, 6 o'clock by dinner time, like then yeah, that's a red flag. Anybody that just takes on business means, well, they'll pay us. We'll probably lock them into a 6-month contract. If it doesn't work, well, we get 6 months out of them. We'll try again. So that's where I would think would be immediate red flag, is if they just want your business. Chances are they don't have your business at heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other must-haves for experience? You know, a certain amount of years.
At least 14 years. If they haven't been in business for 14 years or more,
14.
then don't even consider them.
14-year minimum.
Yeah,
or a sweet YouTube channel.
Well, yeah, sweet YouTube channel. I will say, in the 14 years, obviously, is comical. As a matter of fact, I have noticed that the longer that some agencies are in business, like the more antiquated their strategies are. So our 15 years might work against us if we weren't staying up to date. So
billboards, they still work.
But I do think that depending on your spend, it's okay to give a young agency a shot. I think that's fine. Know that there's a greater risk there, because I mean, I can't tell you how often I see like some kid that took a freaking weekend course and all of a sudden is a Google Ads specialist. So now, in theory, their price will reflect that. And so maybe you'll get somebody who's really, energetic and not to say that we're not, but you know what I mean? Like motivated to make something work. And you get it at a much lower price. But the questions to ask when you're trying to flesh out an agency's experience, because an agency can be in business for 2 years, but have the experience of an agency that's been in business for 5, depending on the number of accounts they've run through and what spend they're managing. Ask about their processes. And here's the interesting thing about processes. Process comes from failure. So when you ask about their processes, and it's really simple, it's like, well, how do you do your onboarding? Oh, well, we do our onboarding this. And then you'll say things like, well, why does it take 10 to 12 business days to build out a campaign? And then they'll say, well, you're on, your submission form takes this long, and then we have to do these things. And the more process you hear, the more experience that agency has, because all it means is they made a mistake and they fixed it. Now, if you get into those really nimble, very much like, oh, we'll have this up by tomorrow, there's nothing wrong with that in theory, but know that their experience is probably pretty low. And hopefully I didn't offend anybody there. Regina, how did I do? Would you agree or disagree with anything I
Yeah,
said?
everything you said sounded great. Yeah, on board.
Did it? Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Cool. I think there's some crossover with qualifications and experience there. And it sounds like to me, there's a certain level that you can weed through on your digital search before you call anybody or you inquire. But it does sound like you obtain a lot of information about a agency's experience when you're having that conversation with them. So how they answer your questions says, and how they explain their processes says a lot about their experience level and their qualifications too. So it's not just the superficial stuff, the stuff that they can put on their website for, X years in business.
Well, make them explain themselves. There's a quote. I wish I could properly attribute this, but it's, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it well enough.
Mhm.
And, if you ask John, oh, why do you run DSA for an early stage campaign? If that was his recommendation, he'll say like, oh, because this, that, what. So get them to explain. One of my favorite questions for fleshing out an agency is, when do you send your reporting? And 99% of all agencies are like, oh, the 1st and the 5th of the month. And that's because that's easy, right? It's easy to automate. It's easy to systemize. Well, then the question is, well, what about delayed attribution? Because there's some accounts that have, 20 to 30 day delay in the data and their ability to report on that data. So what happens if I end up being one of those accounts? And then they're just going to sit there with like a deer in the headlights because they don't realize that, they're not explaining things to a degree that would be necessary to contextualize themselves properly as experts. So you don't have to know Google Ads. Honestly, I feel this way about any topic. I don't have to know brain surgery to interview a brain surgeon and to figure out in probably about 15 minutes whether or not this fool really understands, like what they're saying. And it's constantly asking like, well, why that, or how come, and getting into the granularities.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I love that. Which actually perfectly leads us into number 3, tracking and reporting. So yeah, I don't know if we can give like a really quick summary of what tracking and reporting is, how it plays into your relationship with your agency, what tracking and reporting. I think it might be helpful to explain like what that sort of means, and also how that plays into your relationship, if that makes sense. For those of us who maybe haven't worked with an agency before, why is it important? But also, let's do the part where you explain very simply what those things mean. I'm testing you.
Tracking reporting. So I think what's so funny is, and it's not so funny, more sad. Google Ads is probably the only marketing tool that you can track everything. Facebook used to, then now it has its limitations. SEO is kind of like, I would think. Obviously, billboards, radio, TV, newspaper, no. Google Ads is the only thing, only marketing, I think, medium that you can track everything out to 90 days and sometimes beyond if you're using any sort of third-party attribution tools. And it's one of the 50% of the clients that come to us when they're looking for help or when they're hiring an agency either don't have it at all or it's not set up correctly. And it's like just the one tool that gives you everything you ever wanted to know about any person that ever visited your site through a paid ad, and it's missing. So tracking, if you're incomplete in your tracking, you're not tracking at all, you can't use Google Ads, period. And I will fight anybody that says otherwise, because automated bidding strategies have outsurpassed manual CPC for the most part. Now there's a few cases where it's not.
Doesn't that hurt to say?
Like, I know.
Just get a little,
I know.
Yeah, a little.
Yeah, I die inside a little bit. Yeah, it's not fun to say that, but
yes.
Yeah, I know the machines have won. But what's funny is like it's target cost per acquisition or maximize conversion value at target CPA. All of those things are just so valuable to have a campaign where you're like, here's $1,000, and if you don't hit my goals, spend whatever you can in order to get to that goal, and it'll just do it. There's a lot of campaigns that can do that, and without tracking, you don't leverage any of that, or double tracking. Like if you have, I'm counting 2 different types of conversions, but it's the same conversion, so now my numbers are double, and I think my campaign's doing fantastic, but my bank account's dying. Like, what's going on? You need to track every single possible action that can be taken on your site, from the form fill to the phone call, You need to be able to track like what calls came in from where at what time, what their phone number was, who the caller ID was, what page were they on, what keyword did they search, and how long was it. Like all of that stuff is super important. You can do that within Google Ads. So one of the things I would say is if you're currently running Google Ads and you look at your website and say what possibly could take place on the website and does it match up to what my Google Ads campaign says it's tracking? If not, you're not using Google Ads correctly. And so that's something that is just a huge red flag. If your existing agency isn't doing it, they need to do it. If you're not doing it and you don't know how, you need to hire someone that can do it. But the tracking is just, it's the first thing I always check when evaluating any campaign. I just open up the conversion tab and say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on with the campaign. It could be going great. It could be going horrible, but you're not tracking much or anything at all. So I can't evaluate anything in your campaign because I don't know what's going on, what the results are. So that is just something that your agency that you hire needs to track and monitor every action on the site. It's a non-negotiable for us.
Yeah, and make sure they're not tracking, if you go into the conversions area in Google Ads, you want to make sure that your agency only has the tracking, the actions that you want to optimize for included in conversions. So that's something that, right now, if you have an agency, click on tools and settings and then conversions and make sure included in conversions are only the actions that you want the algorithm to get better at. So if your agency is tracking page views and you're hoping to get purchases, no bueno. Yeah.
I had an evaluation a couple weeks ago and I happened the account. This is 124% conversion rate. I'm like,
I'm not a math scientist.
Every page on their website, it's like if they made it to the homepage, that's a conversion. I'm like, well, your ad's pointed to the homepage. And then they had like, if they made it to my About Us page, that was another conversion. So anytime that someone went to like one page and then another page, it was like 2 conversions off of 1 click. I'm like, no, like, oh my gosh, this is so bad.
You know what Google just did? They just rolled out conversion value rules. So now agencies can go in there and they can say every conversion that takes place, add an additional $50 or double the value of this conversion. And if you don't know, and it's nested, it's hidden. If you don't know where to look for it, you would never know. Google gave people the ability to not just lie about conversions because they've had that. They gave them the ability to lie about conversions in a way that tracks with the truth. So they could just like increase your conversion value by 30% across the board. And you would look at it and be like, well, the trend line is about the same. So yeah, this looks reasonable.
It's pretty close to my bank account. I'm also running Facebook ads and I'm also running Instagram. I'm also on email marketing and some organic traffic. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I just solved my low ROAS problem. Oh, that's bad.
So, okay. So we talked a lot about the tracking just now. And Qasim, you talked before about, reporting problems with reporting sometimes that you might see in like other agencies where they say like the 5th of the month or, pick a random date that they'll send out reports. When you're interviewing your prospective agency or when you're talking to a prospective agency, or I guess if you have a current agency, what should you expect in terms of reporting? And I think there's a couple of things to talk about here, like you mentioned the timeline, but also the reports themselves. What should you be looking at when you get a report, and what are your expectations there? What should your expectations be?
I'd say the biggest red flag in my mind, especially for an early stage relationship, is if an agency says they have a proprietary dashboard. And you'll see this with the really big agencies, and there are some big ones that do this, where you don't get a report from Google Ads. You get a report from their, dashboard.agency.com, and you log in. And what they've done is they're filtering out information and giving you just what you need to know. And that's it's withholding data intentionally. And I can only assume for nefarious purposes. Like there's no reason not to give you everything because here's the thing is we can give you everything and still make it clear, still make it easy to understand. So we've seen a lot of agencies that, they own the ad account. They won't even let you in the ad account. The only report you get to see is a proprietary dashboard. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I'm sure, but make sure that you own the ad account and then make sure that the data that you're receiving comes directly from Google. We use Google Data Studio because Google Data Studio hooks right up to Google Ads. And I can just say, it's just a window into, here's the appropriate data. And if you ever need to log into your Google Ads dashboard, you can absolutely do that. The other thing that I want to say, and I might turn over some of the details to Regina, since she does most, more reporting than anybody else on this call, I'm sure. Be careful about agencies that over-report. Like if an agency's coming at you with, things take time. They take time to work, and so if an agency is being overly aggressive with the information that they're offering, or let's say striking too soon, like we tell our clients it takes 90 days in order to prove concept, and there is a time delay in certain instances, and you want to be careful about an agency that looks to be too aggressive, because it can take time in order to see the way that something is tenuring. And I think generally speaking, that probably speaks to the more immature agencies. It's the folks that just don't realize, hey, we actually have to allow this the time that it needs in order to age.
Yeah, it's true. We have reports that happen, we have reports that we send out that are metrics on a link that, you can look at every month, but then we also have like video updates that we send, which are like little mini reports that we do every week at first, when we first launch. And a lot of those videos are just me saying, well, we can't see much yet, and explaining the intricacies of why we can't see much yet, and just trying to glean any insights that we can. But unfortunately, the first few weeks, there's often, it's slow at first.
Yeah.
Learning. Great. Okay. So again, number 4, we're kind of leading into this fluidly here. Communication, pricing, and transparency. And I think, Regina, you were just sort of touching on communication there a little bit, which is great. But I want to open it up also to, communication in terms of pricing and of the transparency of, and I don't think the transparency necessarily needs to just be in terms of pricing. I think there's a lot of ways in which transparency is super important, if not like the most important, I don't know, quality of a decent agency to work with. But I'd love to pick your brains on expectations in terms of communication, transparency, and pricing, and knowing full well that, pricing is going to vary, right? Like we talked about, depending on the level of experience with your agency, that it's a pretty vast field. So we're going to have a lot of options in terms of pricing. So there's not going to be one singular answer of like, what should I expect in terms of pricing? But I think there's probably some rules you can look for in terms of transparency about pricing and what you're going to get from pricing. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that, gang.
You give a certain amount of money to me, the agency. You give a certain amount of money to Google. You need to know what's going where. And there are agencies that are like, oh, well, you just give me all the money, and then I'll decide on your behalf where things go, and we'll make sure that we take care of it. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
1 for you, 3 for me. For you.
You ever see that old Looney Tunes cartoon? Cats are at the poker table, 1 for you, 1 for me, 2 for you, 1, 2 for me. And so you want to make sure that the spend is very clear. The agency is paid whatever the agency's paid. And, like Patience said, it's really hard to tell people, because I see folks out there that are willing to run ads for like $300 a month. And all I say at that point is think about yourself and what you would be willing to do for $300 a month. Like, how much time would you be willing to commit to anything for $300 a month? And the answer is not 0, right? It's some amount of time. And you might say like, oh, I would do 3 hours of work for $300 a month, or whatever it ends up being. And then ask yourself, can any reasonable person run this campaign in that amount of time? So I don't know that I'm going to beat up too hard on the cheap agencies, because I think that there are some really good agencies out there. And I think that there's, some folks that are really nimble. If they're offshore, that means that, the cost of living over there is less. So maybe they can do more. But it needs to be very clear. And I also think it needs to be structured in a way that is mutually beneficial. So their success is dependent or related or connected to your success. And there are some agencies out there where that's not necessarily the case. So with us, we charge a flat fee plus a percentage of spend, and we charge a percentage of spend because as the campaign scales, so too does the work involved. And as your campaign scales, that means that you're being more successful, obviously, because you wouldn't spend more money if you weren't. And so we're given the opportunity to participate in that success. And so the, lower spend campaigns end up not being that expensive. And then as your campaign scales, we actually become, in terms of a percentage, we become less and less and less and less and less of your marketing budget. But we're still put in a position to be able to increase our profitability, which is helpful as an agency. So I think from a transparency perspective, that's what you should be looking for.
Also contracts. That's the biggest thing that I never understood. Like we have a 30-day contract that just auto renews. Especially when you're working with a PPC agency and you're new to Google Ads. According to Google, 50% of all Google Ads campaigns fail. Now, a good agency can mitigate that by not taking on everyone as a client and also doing a really good job. But you're going to have, let's say, 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 fail in their endeavor in Google Ads. You'll probably find out within the first 2 to 3 months if this is going to be something that is just going to be a complete flop and just shouldn't spend any more money, or if there's signs of life and it's trending better and getting better each month in the right direction. But to pay an agency for a 6-month contract or your year-long contract never made sense to me. Where it's like,
no matter what happens, you'll keep paying me.
Right. So we paused our ads on month 3. So you only have 9 more months left of payments. Like that makes sense. So that was the thing too, is I think like even transparency, it's like, well, if the campaign's pause, why do I keep paying? That was one thing that it's like, I never heard a good answer. And so I just never, and as a business owner, I'm like, you couldn't honestly do that. And that's what's weird to me, is that you really couldn't honestly lock people into a very long contract and say, and we'll give it our best shot and we'll find out in a few months. Well, that doesn't make sense. In terms of, I want to kind of add on something in terms of pricing. Your Google Ads agency should never be considered a cost center to you. It should be considered a profit center. And it should be built into the goal. So as an example, if we know that we need at least 300% return on ad spend, which means every dollar we put into Google, we need $3 back. That should include covering the cost of the agency doing the work. And so that's just something that, when you have an agency that says, hey, I'm going to take my costs and I'm going to build that into your profitability model. And that's what we're going to set our goal to, and scale above that goal or get above that goal and then scale that. That should be how that relationship should go. And if you're paying your Google Ads agency more than what you have in ad spend, typically it's not going to be a good idea, because they have to take like 10 times that budget, make 10 times the revenue from that budget just to pay for themselves and then put any sort of cash in your pocket. So make sure that if you're hiring an agency and they are expensive, you give them enough ad spend in order for them to pay for themselves, put cash in your pocket. So that's just a good way of thinking about, pricing. It shouldn't really necessarily be a factor if they're good.
Great. Regina, anything to add?
That sounded great to me.
Regina's like, you're hired.
About Regina.
Sorry?
So Regina's a client manager, right? And I mentioned that when you work with us, you have 5 dedicated resources, and one of them is a client manager. Most agencies put you in touch with one resource who, generally speaking, is the person running and managing the campaigns and also talking to the client and also devising the strategy and mowing the lawn, if that's something that full funnel agency has been requested to do. Our agency has an entire department dedicated solely really to communication. Client managers, and the bullet point here is communication, pricing, and transparency. Client managers communicate with the client and then communicate with the specialists. And when they're communicating with the specialists, they're the advocate for the client. And so that extra level, that layer, I think brings so much to the table, because imagine if you only have one resource, even if they're a phenomenal resource, it's so hard to be the only person in the room strategizing about this account. And Regina does a phenomenal job at it.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. There's so many moments where I'm talking with a specialist about something that, a client has been focused on or wanting to do. And the specialist says, well, we could do this other thing and it would be better. And then I have to go back to the client, educate them on why we're not going to do the thing they want to do. And instead we're going to do another thing, or, at least make sure they're on board with that before we do it. And, if I was the only one doing all the things, I might just do what the client said instead of what would be even better for the overall business, but the business's bottom line. Yeah, that would
That's
be
a really good point.
a
Yeah.
lot.
It's human nature to have the conversation that lends itself to the easiest thing for you to do later. You know what I mean? So if you're on the
Yeah.
phone with the person who's your direct channel of communication and the one that has to do the work after the fact, that's a much different conversation than someone who gets to fire off a bunch of orders to our entire team of specialists. Like now, and not to say that the other person wouldn't be honest, but just to say that there really is a level and layer of, just cognitive dissonance that would play into their need to control the scope. So
Yeah,
I
you're
think
making game time decisions, oh, this
Yeah.
campaign isn't working, let's turn it off.
Right.
And the specialist might say, well, there's one thing we haven't tried yet, and the campaign could still work. And, you might not have realized that if you're in the middle of talking to a client about what to cut,
Yeah. Well, and it's a different mentality, like client management is creative, it's right brained, it's dynamic, it's connecting all the dots. Running a Google Ads account, that's like, deep, dark, cave dwelling, over caffeinated software engineer up until 2 a.m. doesn't want to talk to people, and trying to get that one human to do all of those roles. That sounds hard. I don't know how people do it.
There's a weird atmosphere that CMs have to go through because they work for Solutions 8, but they're the client's advocate.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is if you're also the button pusher, when you're an advocate for the client, sometimes you might make it in the heat of the moment decision. Client's like, I'm unhappy, I'm upset. And the client manager's like, hey, you're right, let's just shut everything off. And in the meantime, the person's like, wait, we're in the first 2 weeks of testing. So having a client advocate is a good idea, but they should also work with a team that says, here's our plan and here's what we expect and here's the milestones we need to hit and we should see this, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, having a client manager is a Solutions 8 employee that works for you on behalf of your company, sort of with the strategist, not against them, but it's really the client manager saying like, you guys need to do better. We're like, yes, we'll do better. That's the kind of the situation that goes on there. So the paradigm works really, really well, but the person that's your advocate should not be turning things on and off. Usually wouldn't work out that well.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a big takeaway for me too. I don't know if we said this explicitly, but having dedicated resources to you in terms of communication, if you're freaked out about something, right? If you're dealing with a lot of money or something's happening and you have concerns and worries, I would imagine as a business owner, having a point of contact, and in our case, a team, right? But having that point of contact, a client manager who's like your person, your advocate, is probably pretty important communication wise, just knowing that there's someone you can reach out to if you're concerned, if you have questions, and it's not going to be, whoever's available at that time, like, oh, we have a team of client managers who are here to help you. It's you have a person, you have a dedicated client manager. And me being, like I'm a writer, right? Like I'm not really like, so I'm trying to put myself in the position of like a business owner, and I would imagine as a business owner that would be super important communication wise, just knowing who to talk to and that you could trust that person. So
and that they know your history of what you've been through with the company, you've been through before the company, they know kind of what your inclinations are and your goals.
You end up being friends with them, like yeah, there are clients that I get on the phone with that we just bro down,
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just have a good time.
We sometimes will have a call that's like 30 minutes, and the first like 8 minutes, like here's the update, here's what we're doing, here's what we're looking at, and here's looking good. Like, all right, sounds good. And like, man, see that fire out and the wildfire that's going on? Like, yeah. And then you just talk for like 25 minutes about just news.
Yeah.
Kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like
When
that's
you hire Solutions 8, you're hiring a friend.
You're hiring a friend. Is that a new tagline?
Yeah, friends
Well,
for hire.
You got a friend in me. I think that's copyrighted though, probably somewhere.
Yeah, we'll rework it. Number 5, strategy. Hey, strategy.
You need strategy.
You need strategy.
Yeah.
Strategy is important. Strategy is good. Number 6. No.
And moving on. Yeah, anything important, anything like super noteworthy that we should discuss in terms of strategy for your Google Ads agency? I know you're all, you know,
Ask
dying.
why. Always ask why. Oh, we're gonna
Yeah.
run this. Why? Why? And what's really interesting is you'd be maybe semi-surprised at how often the person you're talking to goes, you know, I don't know. This is just the checklist that they gave me.
I
So
just was told to do it.
I'm just
Been
doing
it
what
for
I'm
10
told.
years.
Yeah, ask why.
And then ask for examples. That part too is, I think, really important. The strategy, if it's a cookie cutter strategy, red flag. If they can't make sense down to the minutia of the strategy, red flag. If it's a strategy that looks very expensive and you're not sure why we're putting that much ad spend in all those different places all at once, and they can't tell you why, not a red flag. Strategy should be only driven around your goal. And what I mean by that is, if your goal is 300% return on ad spend, and you say, okay, well, how is that campaign going to get 300%? And then you should be like, well, maybe this campaign will not, but this one will actually feed users to the site, so the remarketing can do that. And those two combined will have this because our ad spend's at this level. They need to be able to lay out the strategy well enough that a layman person can say, you know what, that makes sense. I understand and I agree. And if that doesn't happen, don't run it yet, because either you may not fully understand, which means they didn't do a job explaining it correctly, or they don't know what they're talking about. So strategy needs to, I mean, for the first 6 months of that campaign running, they should be able to explain every strategy before it starts, when it will start, why it will start, how will they know when they should start, what ad spend should be removed, what ad spend should be added, what bidding strategies that were used, and why does that pertain to the goal, everything around that goal. So if it's, if you have a lead generation campaign and an e-commerce campaign, and those two accounts, or I'm sorry, lead generation account and a e-commerce account, those two accounts look identical, that's wrong. Now that is a lot of times what happens. So like Kasim said, ask why, and ask, how's that going to give you 300%? How's that going to give you 300%? How's that going to give you 300%? They should have a very logical answer that you can understand and possibly see an example of that taking place, so that you can say, aha, this makes sense. I understand the strategy. That's super, super paramount. I can't tell you how many times we have people saying like, yeah, I ask the agency questions and they don't get back to me for like 2 weeks and I don't really understand what they're doing. All I know is the campaign's not working. That means that we didn't understand the strategy before it started, and it failed because no one might have known what was going on. They were just kind of just throwing spaghetti against the wall. So that is extremely important, to be able to have someone that could take an hour if need be and explain every single thing that's going to happen in that campaign down to the dollar amount per day. And if they can't, that's wrong. That's just going to be expensive.
Yeah, and it sounds like you should be able to understand it. Like it's
You
not
know
a
what
foreign
they're
language
doing.
to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tall order.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Sounds reasonable. I don't know if we have anything else to add, Kasim or Regina, or if we should move on to tools. Because I'm curious. Tools cost money, right? Like, I mean, these online subscriptions, and there's so many tools out there that I'm sure agencies utilize to enhance their business and what their services. At what point are tools necessary? And you should expect your agency to use certain tools. And at what point are certain tools perhaps a money suck that you're perhaps paying for with your monthly fees, whatever your schedule is for billing? If that's built in to what they're charging you. What do you need tool-wise? What don't you need?
If a software was going to put us out of business, it would have happened already. It's the paradox of the time machine, right? Like if they ever invented a time machine in the future, then they would have come back and told us about it at some point, right? So, and I'm not saying that a piece of software won't put us out of a business someday, but what I'm saying is it hasn't happened yet. And you know that because we're still here and our campaigns perform better than anybody else's campaigns. So, these agencies that talk about like, oh, their proprietary application that helps optimize a campaign, blah, 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 blah. If that worked, you would be beating me and you're not. Now,
You'd be beating Google.
You'd be beating Google. Yeah. That's the other thing too. It's like, oh, really? Your little startup is going up against $1 trillion Leviathan that, is the closest thing to artificial intelligence that humanity's ever created. Okay. I don't I do see merit in, like monitoring softwares. I mean, I'm buddies with the guy who runs Optimizer, Frederick Vallis. He's awesome. He was employee 400 some odd at Google. He's like invented conversion tracking, brilliant guy, really cool piece of software. He and I have fundamental disagreements about how it should be used, but like it has some like really awesome monitoring tools, some really awesome, like, automated adjustments based off of rules that you define. But I'd be really cautious against anybody who's selling you the AI machine learning, set it and forget it, and here's the thing, try it. And I really mean that. I'm not being petulant. Try it. Because if it works, that is awesome. And call me and tell me, because I'm on board. But that, generally speaking, is a failed narrative. So everything that we do is manually driven from a strategic standpoint. Can you rely on software to help support that? Absolutely. But I'd be really careful about Google Ads right now is not a SaaS play. It's not you're looking for high level strategy and human intervention.
Yeah, there's no software out there yet. I could say if you run, a competitive campaign at a lower budget with lower CPCs because you have a bad quality score, that's a good idea. If you run a brand campaign, but that one's going to have amazing ROAS, so don't set too much your daily budget because those are just going to be people that are going to find you organically anyway. But you need to protect your brand name. Like, there's no software that's going to tell you what to do. And what's funny is Google Ads inside of its recommendation tab makes recommendations that are just terrible. Like, that's the reason why Google said, okay, fine, you can still ignore recommendations and keep your premier partner status, because everyone else was like, man, if we have to be held to a optimization score of what Google's asking us to do, I'd rather just not be a premier partner. I'll have better performance for my clients. And so even Google themselves, like, hey, do you know if you add like this branded keyword to the non-brand campaign, your non-brand campaign will perform better? It's like, yeah, because that's cheating. But so no. So it's so funny. But the other part too is there's absolutely tools that you'll need. Call tracking metrics. That's a tool that we use that is bolted on to our Google Ads campaign, so we can hear every single phone call that comes in from that campaign. Espionage, SpyFu, SEMrush. What's that?
And we can rate the phone calls as leads or not leads, and then we can optimize from the not leads.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can see what was a bad call and what was a good call, and only tell Google, only count the good calls. Don't count the hangups, the wrong numbers, the voicemails that didn't leave voicemail, or the non-answers that went to voicemail. But other tools like iEspionage, excuse me, SEMrush, SpyFu, those are really, really, really great tools for competitive metrics. Now, don't use them as gospel, which means if it says, hey, they're going after this keyword, don't be like, me too. Like, it's an indicator of what's going on. So use them to make sound judgment calls. There is a lot of good tools out there, but any tool that's like, hey, we're better at Google than their automated bidding strategy, I will yeah, exactly. I will run it against the campaign for Solutions 8 and see if I can go toe to toe with that and beat it.
Yeah, if somebody has found gold, they're not trying to sell you a shovel. They're out there shoveling their own gold. Like, they're just, it doesn't make any sense.
It's fool's gold. Trust me, it's gold.
Awesome. Okay. I would like to now, for our last jargony topic, can you talk a little bit about the beginning stages of campaign building and what you can expect to see inside your account in terms of activity from your agency? Because I imagine there's a sort of a gold standard of like how much activity should be going on once the campaign is built. What is too much activity? What should we be looking for with our agency's campaign build and with their account activity once it's built?
I think as a preface, what would be really cool is to have Regina define the onboarding process that she has to go through for every single client. Because y'all, it's insane. It's insane the amount of work that we do before, pen ever touches paper, so to speak. Regina, if you don't mind me throwing you under the bus, I'd love to.
It is a lot. Yeah. It's funny because most new customers, most new clients are really eager to get going, and they're like, when are we going to go? When are we going to go live? And I'm like, oh, it's going to be close to like 2 weeks, like 10 business days. And there's a good reason for that. If an agency is like, oh yeah, we can go live tomorrow. Well, did they just throw something together? Did they do their competitor research? There's just so much that we go through. So let me think. First of all, we have an onboarding manager. Her name is Angelia, and she makes sure that all the accounts get hooked up. She makes sure that we have a huge, long onboarding form that new clients fill out, where we learn so much about you, so much more than we could ever find on your website. You know, what are your metrics, your goals, things that you've gone through in the past? What is your customer avatar? And do you have 2 or 3 of them? And, you know, if we have to choose, you know, a top selling product to focus on because of limited budget or something like that, what would that top product be? There's just a lot of questions that we ask. So once the pre-onboarding part is done, and you move on to talking to your client manager, me, and we have a whole department of us. Then we meet with the client. We go through some basic website edits, things that we know we're going to need you to change before we go live. We go through, usually there's just some general questions that came up. Yeah, general questions that came up through the internal meeting that we had that I actually totally skipped over. So we have an internal meeting before we meet with clients. And that's where a lot of technical questions come up, because we're already kind of pre-planning out the strategy at that point. So by the time you talk to a client manager for the first time, they should already have read everything that all the information that you've given them. Hopefully it's a large body of knowledge, because this person is acting as your marketing department, and they should also have already spoken to the technical people on their team to see if there's any red flags or codes that need to be installed, or, you know, web forms that need to be edited on your site to make the Google Ads pixels work. So, all right, what happens next? Then we go into the account build. So there's a lot that happens here behind the scenes, but at some point, a gigantic list of ad copy and keywords gets compiled after much competitive research and keyword planning tools and things like that. So make sure your agency is letting you see the ad copy and the keywords before they actually build the thing. Otherwise, it's a lot slower and a lot harder to make those edits after the fact. So we will send you the ad copy and the keywords to review and edit and approve. And then we build everything. We always do a pre-launch review call or a video as well. So, you know, before we go live, once everything's built, we always want to get the client's last review, because they're the industry expert. You know, you guys know your industry better than we ever could. So if we've missed a keyword, if we've added something that you really think, you know, you've tried before and it's not going to work, it's going to pull in the wrong type of lead. We want to know these things. And that's that, you know, we go live, and that's when we jump right into those weekly video check-ins. And we kind of do some video check-ins very frequently until the dust settles. Meetings happen on an as-needed basis. Some accounts really need a lot of you know, open discussion, and there's a lot of creative stuff to come up with. Other accounts, it's pretty straightforward. You know, we are fighting against an algorithm, you know, collecting data and forcing it to grow by pushing various buttons at different times. So you know, it's
that was
different
the best
with
description
everybody.
of Google Ads I've ever heard in my entire life.
Right. Fighting various algorithms by choosing specific buttons.
I just recently explained to a client that it's like we're taking the algorithm to the gym, you know, and if we just set a goal on there of exactly what it wants to hit forever, the muscle is just gonna atrophy. But if we're adding a high goal and removing it and then adding another high goal, it's gonna be like building muscle.
That's brilliant. I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of account activity, I'm just curious, you know, if you log into your account after your agency's, you know, you've been working with your agency for X amount of time, how many changes, like what should you see when you log in activity wise?
You know, what's funny is there's not necessarily a set amount of work or buttons that need to be pressed at any certain time. It's very much related to, if the campaign's not performing well, there should be a plan put in place, and then you should be able to hop into change history and see that plan being executed. If the campaigns are going really good, a lot of times we'll have a client that's like saying, hey, what else can we do? It's like, well, you pay us quite a good amount of money to make sure that we don't press the wrong button. Like, for me to go in there and say like, well, I'll just kick up the, bid 20 cents and I'll change the bidding algorithm, see if that works better. You can really mess up a long-term learning algorithm by saying like, okay, now go that way. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, now go back that way. You're just going to see dips in performance. So a lot of times what we have when we start with a client is like a 2-year plan. And that's legitimate. When I say 2-year plan, that's why we need to know the numbers, so that when we set up a custom column that shows profit, which is conversion value times 0.36 minus cost, which tells me exactly what a 36% profit margin on average is netting out every day. Knowing what we have, we're going to be making very specific changes in order to, like what Regina was saying, it's like toggle the ROAS goal off, get it to spend 20% more, then toggle it back on, see if we reach the next level, but didn't dip below certain ROAS and kept profitability. So just to hop in there and say like, hey, what are you doing? You should know that by day 1 through year 2. And that should be communicated, this month we're focusing on this, or hey, there's a downturn, here's what we're doing in order to get that to change. And it should come from your client manager or the strategist. And then changes, so you should be able to see that happen. But what I do think people get caught up for is like what have you done today? It's like, well, I'll get you 768% return on ad spend, even though I didn't touch the campaign. Like, I'm doing that on purpose, to make sure that we can have a results driven campaign, not necessarily a work driven campaign, because those are 2 different campaigns. Like, you can charge by the hour and you're going to have mediocre performance, but if you're holding a agency accountable to the results, for me, it doesn't necessarily matter what's in the change history, as long as the result's getting what you want.
My favorite thing that John said to a client was, you're not just paying me so I know what buttons to press, you're paying me to know what buttons not to press. There's a lot of agencies, there's software out there, y'all, that we could actually, it'd be easy for us to take in to apply software to all of our accounts and change bids by a penny and show like, hundreds of changes every month. Yeah, exactly. Like it's so funny how it's not relevant to the KPI. And if that's what you want, go hire an employee. Like, don't hire an agency, go hire an employee so you can sit there and look over their shoulder and be like, what have you done today? And God bless you in that endeavor. But here's the thing is, we're in the accounts, we're looking like on a regular basis. Sometimes you're just looking and watching, but that's also what you're paying somebody to do. We're doing it so you don't have to.
Yeah. We actually meet internally about every account every week, at least once. Some accounts end up having more internal meetings every week, but at least one meeting on every account every week. And it's funny how varied our notes are. One account might have, oh, we changed 10 things today. And then another account is good. See if the client wants to increase some budget, So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I've taken up a ton of your time. So number 8, the greatest number. Can we talk about brand culture? Because I feel like this is like more of a fun one. We've talked a lot about like sort of technical stuff, but I don't want to get away from the fact that, when you're hiring an agency, you're forming a connection, a relationship. And I think it's worth discussing that relationship, the brand culture. Why is the culture important with the agency you're looking to connect with?
You're going to end up like almost living with these people in a certain instance. And I don't mean like your roommates and with each other every minute of every day, but the way that we interact with our clients, even if the time isn't that intensive, the importance of the tasks that we're undertaking are, they're not insignificant. And, like, you don't want to hang around people that you don't like. And so make sure, and y'all, here's the other thing is that means that we might not be the right fit for everybody. Like, somebody's watching my YouTube videos being like, that guy is a douchebag. But it's just important for you to, I think it's important to do business with people that you like, and to make sure that you're working with an organization that not only is going to treat you well, because honestly, I feel like that's easy. I feel like, taking care of the customer, it's not even a positive anymore. It's the baseline. It's 0. Make sure they're taking care of their people. Like, you know, and not just the front lines. Like, how does it look on the back end? Go check out their Glassdoor profile. You know, look at the way that people talk about them after the fact. How do they take care of their vendors and their strategic partners? I think all of that stuff is really important.
Basically hiring an employee, really.
Yeah.
You gotta like that person.
Yeah.
It's like hiring a department of employees.
A whole bucket of employees that are all coming. And, you know, you don't have to be a BFFs, but, and the flip side of that coin too, just incidentally, here's a good example of where we might not be the right fit. There's some, like, you know, they tend to be larger, but there's some organizations that are like, oh yeah, we need, you know, an hour meeting every day. And we want, it's kind of the ivory tower agency approach to where they want to be very plugged in, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and there's a lot of, you know, fill out the forms and do the things. And we're not going to do that. I don't want anything to do with it. That puts a knot in my stomach. I don't want any, you know, anybody that works with us to have to do that. So make sure that the culture aligns both ways. You know, us with them and them with us.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. And sometimes we're needy though, too. And so you gotta really like us because we might be like, hey, got a question, we got 15 minutes and just need to have a good call with you. But that's the thing. Yeah. I think company culture, that's like, we hire all around the world. We hire from everywhere, because when you're trying to find, you know, a very specific high level skill set, can't be limited to like the 10-mile radius of your office. It's just not going to bring the most quality person. So we have a lot of amazing, truly, I mean, everybody that works with us is amazing. There's no one that's not just pure amazing. That's because we had to go literally around the world to find them.
It takes 250 applications to produce one specialist.
Yeah, we go through a lot of applications. But that's the thing too, is I think that building a company culture of people that enjoy their work, are passionate about their work, are self-starters, and people that we don't have to necessarily manage those. And that's what I mean, like, we manage them. It's not like we're not managing these people, but don't have to manage.
Right.
There's a big distinction there. Not having to manage employee means that they're proactive. I like the two words that I like to use is they're direct with a smile. Like, they'll tell you, here, we can't do this, we can't do this, or but they'll be in an upbeat way, and it's very positive, and it's just going to be the straight truth. Yeah.
Make sure you're not just like, oh, I like them, they say yes to everything I ask. No.
Yeah.
Make sure they're going to hold the flame to the fire, you know.
An app that only runs from 1 to 1:30 a.m. Great idea, boss.
Pleasantly disagreeable.
Right, there you go.
Sometimes, when need be, not always, but yeah.
Well, and I think really what that means is honest. Like, we have our values are on the website. It's truth, responsibility, heart. And heart, to me, just so y'all know, it always really means love, but people don't like the word love. It turns them off because it's kind of like maybe a little too gooey. So we say heart, but you have to be honest. You have to be responsible. You have to care.
Yeah, you really have to care.
You have to care. If you don't care, you know, like, I mean, when stuff, and you know, there's things that go wrong, and even things that we're not necessarily accountable to. Like, we had a client recently who I really like. He's got a small business. He produces a specialized type of sports equipment, and he couldn't get any material out of China, which is where all of his stuff comes from, in order to produce it. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see this person and he's so enthusiastic about everything. And it was, you know, I mean, you're watching him not be able to do the thing that he was kind of meant to do. And
it's like Da Vinci with a broken paintbrush.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But with no paintbrush, because it's
there you go.
Clogged. But, you know, and then once it comes in, now it's just like pedal to the metal, because he's actually back on track right now, and his campaigns are doing great. But you got to care. You got to really care.
Empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You writers and your big words.
Yeah.
Small business, small compared with, you know, Amazon. Small businesses run the world. We're like the army that goes up against the big guys, the Goliath. So, you know, or I guess we and our clients, you know, I'm really passionate about helping small business succeed.
Yeah,
there's so much at stake for a small business, you know, like when a big business, if something happens, it's just like, oh yeah, our shareholders are getting less of a dividend this quarter. But for a small business, there's that meme that I swear to God, I almost cry it. Yeah, every time I see it, it's like, you know, when you buy from a small business, you're helping a little girl get her ballet shoes and a little boy get his football jersey. Like, it's so true. Those are all of our clients. You know, we've got 160 some odd clients, and I think, like, I don't know what, 10 are in the 9 figures, you know, maybe.
I had a client the other day, and I'm always a very conservative strategist. I will be the first one to say I can find out with $2,000 what another agency can find out with 10. And that's very, very true because we're very good at what we do. But I'm a super conservative marketer. Like, hey, should we double the budget? I'm like, no. Our pay is actually directly aligned with their Google ad spend, like how much we make. It does go in line. But I'm super conservative about it all the time. And even, a lot of clients, they see that. They say, hey, you're always very conservative with the ad spend. You don't spend too wildly, don't take too many risks. I appreciate that. I had a client the other day where I said, hey, we should start to scale a little bit, but not too fast. He goes, well, if this was your company and this was your ad spend, what would you do? I'm like, the same exact thing I just told you. Like this, I act as if this was money coming out of my pocket. Would I be worried about it? And if so, I'm not going to make that move. And so that's just what's funny is like that's where the heart and that's where the care comes in. We have clients that are in right now. They're a small business. They're in every food or they're in every grocery store, Whole Foods, Fry's, like they're everywhere. They're still kind of a small business, but they're everywhere. And their other agency that they talked to wasn't for Google Ads. I'm not going to name what channel or whatever it is, but they're like, yeah, they said they need 20 grand off the bat or they're not going to work with us. And our ad spend when we first started was 2. Now it's at 6,000 per month, but we started small. We took the profits from the campaign and reinvested and started to grow. And that's, I could be the other person and be like, yeah, we're a pretty important agency and we'll need 20 grand, but I'll work myself up to 20 grand and you'll make money along the way. That's the philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I love our brand culture. So might be biased, but yeah, it's important stuff. Did I miss anything? Are there any glaring notes that I have failed as a journalist and a communicator and should thus retire?
I think this was great.
Yeah, I think it was good too. I'm a
I think
fan.
this is probably the same conversation every small business should have with themselves internally before
Absolutely.
hiring an agency. So yeah, nailed it. Great job.
Yeah. Great.
Solid.
We did it.
Well, I appreciate your time. And of course, if you have questions, we're here.
You know where
And
to
we
find us.
also, I'm sorry, Regina.
You know where to find us.
You know where to find us. And we have a YouTube channel, which you can subscribe and learn a whole heck of a lot if you're not ready for a Google Ads agency. Like we said at the beginning here, you need to determine if Google Ads is right for you. And then if it is, and you're not ready for an agency, you can learn a whole lot before you get to that point. So
I think there's like 350 videos on that channel now.
Wow.
Like it's insane. And it's just our brain in video form in 10 to 15 minute bite-sized chunks. It's amazing.
Austin and John they're just knowledge dumping every day into that YouTube channel. Go check it out.
Yes, so lots of options, but I appreciate you all for your time and
appreciate you, Patience.
Yeah, good job, Patience. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up. That lets YouTube know we actually know what we're doing. We shoot a video every single day. So if you want to be notified, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any input, don't hesitate to hit us up in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We get very little human interaction. Thanks for supporting our channel, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.